Elias bought Clara in near darkness. The deal struck with a chill as cold as the silver coins he laid on the table. There were no questions, no blessings, just the clink of metal, the reek of kerosene, and the bitter wind off the Wyoming hills. It was late in the 19th century, and winter had arrived early. The air hovered near 40 degrees, sharp enough to bite the lungs, carrying the clean scent of pine from the high ridge. Elias stood with the stillness of a man used to waiting, his wide-brimmed hat shadowing a face carved by years under sun and loss. Across from him, Clara's mother twisted the cork from a whiskey jug, her cracked lips curling as she counted the coins. "Paid more than she's worth," she muttered, unlocking the iron cuffs from Clara's wrists. Clara didn't flinch. She was young, barely more than a girl, her belly rounded with 8 months' weight, her eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the rutted street. She carried nothing in her hands, but inside her right boot, stitched into the lining, lay a thin blade, a last line of control in a life that had given her none. They walked to the waiting horse without speaking. The saddle was damp with sweat, the leather smelling of rain. The ride to his homestead stretched 3 long miles through trails choked with dust and shadow. The wind hissed through the pines, and the only other sound was the steady creak of saddle leather under his weight. When they reached the place, Clara saw nothing but wild land on every side. No neighbors, no fences, only a squat house with a porch that looked like it hadn't heard laughter in a decade. Inside, the air was clean to the point of sterility. Wood smoke and lemon oil, no hint of tobacco or perfume. A single photograph hung crooked over the mantel. A woman with bright, steady eyes holding a baby blanket. The child was absent from the frame, but the emptiness spoke louder than words. "You can stay here," Elias said, leading her to a small room at the end of the hall. A hand-stitched quilt covered the bed, and on the dresser sat a brush, a mirror, and a pair of unused shoes. The room smelled faintly of lavender and dust, like something kept waiting for years. He stood in the doorway, his voice low and flat. "I won't come in without knocking." He left without another word. Clara stood alone, her hand resting on her stomach, wondering if the quiet here would be any different from the silences she had known before, the ones edged with danger. Outside, the wind shifted and the air tasted faintly of snow. If you love tales of grit, redemption, and love that lasts, subscribe now and ride with us to the very end. The first knock came sharp against the doorframe, rattling the glass panes in their wooden grips. Clara was peeling carrots by the open kitchen window, the pale winter light pooling on the table, when Elias stepped past her and swung the door open. A woman in a black bonnet stood there, her boots caked with mud, her jaw set like chiseled stone. "Martha," Elias said evenly. "I came for eggs," she replied, though her eyes had already skipped past him to settle on Clara. Her gaze crawled over Clara's frame, lingering on the curve of her belly. "And to see this girl you brought in." Clara's hands stilled, the knife hovering over the cutting board. The neighbor's lips curled. "Ain't she ripe? Barely grown herself and already swelled up like a fall pumpkin. What's the matter, Elias? Town too quiet without a scandal?" He didn't move, but the muscles in his jaw shifted once. "She your new pet?" Martha pressed, each word sharp as a spur. "Didn't take you long, did it? Bury your wife, then bring in some barefoot stray from the flats? You always did like 'em young." Clara felt her cheeks heat, but she didn't drop her eyes. Her fingers tightened on the knife handle. "You want eggs?" Elias asked at last. "I asked," Martha snapped. He disappeared into the kitchen, returning with a small basket. He held it out without comment. Martha snatched it, her eyes still burning holes through Clara. "She won't last, you know. Trash never does." Elias stepped back and closed the door. No slam, no curse, just a single click in the silence that followed. Clara stood frozen long after Martha's footsteps faded down the trail. She'd expected Elias to speak, to deny it, to defend her. Instead, he'd done nothing, said nothing, and left the poison to linger. That night, she sat at the edge of the bed brushing out her hair, the mirror reflecting the dim glow of the lamp. The portrait of the other woman, Elias's wife, watched her from the wall, eyes calm and unblinking. Clara whispered to it, her voice low. "He's more afraid of their words than mine." Sleep didn't come easily. The house was too still, the silence not warm but waiting. When she could bear it no longer, she slipped from under the quilt, pulling on the long coat Elias kept on the peg. The blade in her boot pressed against her ankle as she padded down the hall. The front door opened with a soft groan. Rain had begun to fall, cold and fine, whispering against the porch boards. She stepped out into the dim light of a guttering oil lamp and stopped. Elias was there, not in bed, not watching her, but kneeling on the wet boards with a saddle across his knees. He was threading fresh leather through a torn stirrup strap, his brow furrowed in concentration, his hair plastered to his forehead. The rain dripped from his coat in steady lines. He didn't look up until she was standing just beyond the lamplight, the knife useless in her hand. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. He gave a single nod and returned to his work, the pull of the leather through the worn holes steady and sure. "She always said this place needed mending," he murmured, almost to himself. "Meant more than the fence." Clara lingered a moment longer, the rain cooling her skin, then turned back inside. She slid the knife beneath her pillow, not out of trust, not yet, but because whatever this man was, he wasn't what she'd prepared for. In the morning, bread and blackberry jam sat on the table. No note, no questions. Just bread and a kind of silence that for once wasn't heavy, only still. The first time Clara heard the sound, she thought it was the baby. It was well past midnight. The fire in her room burned down to embers, and a thin, plaintive cry threaded through the quiet. She slid from bed, bare feet touching the cool floor, and followed it down the hall. The light spilling from the front room was soft and low, the moon filtering through thin curtains. Elias sat in the old rocker by the window, his broad shoulders hunched, something small resting in his hands. As she drew closer, she saw it. A tiny pink dress, hand-stitched, delicate as a petal. His thumb traced the hem as if memorizing every loop of thread. "She made it after the third," he said without turning. Clara hesitated. "The third what?" "The third loss." His voice was steady but hollow. "She lost 7. He paused, still looking at the dress. "I buried each behind the ridge. Boys, girls, we never named them." He swallowed once. "I buried this one after the 7th. Couldn't look at it anymore. The air between them thickened with a grief she hadn't expected, not from a man who spoke so little. She left him there in the moonlight, not because she wanted to, but because she didn't know what to do with the ache in her chest. The next morning, Elias rode into town. Clara waited until he was out of sight, then wrapped herself in her shawl and stepped outside. The wind was sharp, the sun pale and cold. She followed a faint path beyond the barn, through a thinning stand of pine. The higher she climbed, the harder the wind bit at her cheeks. At the ridge, she saw them. 7 markers, uneven and weathered, each one etched with a simple number. No names, no flowers. The last stood on fresher earth, a single stunted wildflower leaning against it as if bowing to the wind. Clara knelt, her palm resting on the wood. It was warm despite the cold. She didn't hear Elias approach, but when she turned, he was there, hat in hand. "I thought you killed her," she said quietly. "I thought that's what they meant in town." "I know what they say," he replied, his voice low. "And I let them." "Why?" "Because arguing takes more breath than silence." His gaze moved to the markers. Each one took a little more from her, and from me. By the 7th, there was nothing left. They stood there until the wind grew harsher, then walked back down together, slow, even steps, side by side. After that, something shifted. Clara no longer waited for Elias to leave before she stepped outside. She joined him by the south fence, holding nails as he mended the boards, her gloves dusted with dirt. At noon, she cooked corn, beans, and rabbit he trapped that morning. In the evenings, she read aloud from the worn Bible on the kitchen shelf. One night, as she read, her voice caught on a verse. "Sorrow may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning." She looked up. "What does it mean?" she asked. Elias sat in the rocker, carving a spoon from hickory. It means sometimes you have to lose something to understand what's worth finding. Her mind drifted back, not to this quiet kitchen, but to the goat shed her mother had locked her in for 2 nights because she said no, just once. She remembered the mining town, the thick air of whiskey and coal dust, the father of her child who vanished as soon as he learned. She thought of the boarded windows of the boarding house where she scrubbed sheets until her hands bled. The memories didn't crush her as they once had. Not here. Not with the crackle of the fire and the steady rhythm of a knife against wood. For the first time in months, she let her breath out slowly and didn't feel the need to look over her shoulder. The storm came in low and heavy, a slow-moving wall of gray that pressed against the valley and settled over the ranch like a held breath. The rain began at dusk, steady and cold, rattling against the windows and pooling in the low spots of the yard. Clara stood at the stove, ladling stew into 2 bowls, the scent of rabbit and onion filling the small kitchen. Elias came in from the porch, shaking off his coat and setting it to dry by the hearth. They ate without much talk at first, the kind of quiet that had become the rhythm between them. But that night, something inside her refused to stay buried. "My mother," Clara began, her voice low. "She wanted me in the saloon." Elias's spoon paused just above his bowl, but he didn't speak. "She said I was pretty enough to earn my keep pouring whiskey and sitting on miners' laps." Clara's fingers tightened around the wooden spoon. The men paid more if the girl smiled like she meant it. She shook her head once. "I said no, just once. That was enough. She locked me in the goat shed for 2 nights with nothing but water. After that," Clara swallowed hard, "I stopped saying no." The fire popped in the grate. Outside, the rain whispered against the roof. "I ran," she continued. "Found work in a boarding house in Dry Creek, scrubbing sheets, carrying water, mending torn shirts. It wasn't much, but it was mine." A faint bitterness edged her voice. "Then I met him, the father. He was kind until he wasn't. And when I told him I was expecting..." She let the sentence trail into silence. "I don't even know if he knows. I don't know if I'd want him to." Elias didn't offer comfort or questions. He set his spoon down and met her gaze with a steady, unreadable look. There was no judgment in it, no pity either. Only the acknowledgement of a truth laid bare. After a moment, he rose and opened the back door. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and the air smelled of wet earth and cedar. "Come here," he said. She followed him outside, her shawl pulled tight. Along the fence line, a crooked row of wooden stakes jutted from the soil. Beside each, the ground was freshly turned. "You're planting something," she said, stepping closer. "Roses." Clara glanced at him. "In this soil? They won't take. They never have." He crouched to press the dirt around one of the bulbs. But she believed they would. "Your wife?" He nodded once. Every spring she'd try again. Even when the wind stripped them bare, even when the petals never opened. She said the ground just needed time. I never believed it. But I planted anyway. Because when she looked out and saw them, even the ones that didn't bloom, she smiled like they did. Clara knelt beside him, the damp earth cool against her palms. She touched the stake nearest her, letting her fingers sink into the loosened soil. "I think she was right," she said softly. He glanced at her, the faintest crease in his brow, as if the words didn't fit in the place he'd kept for roses. Next to loss, not hope. "If it's a girl," Clara went on, "I'll name her Rose." She looked at the bulb in her hand. "She'll grow where no one thinks she can, even if it takes time." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt like the space between a seed and its first sprout, quiet, patient, alive with possibility. Elias straightened, brushing the dirt from his hands. He didn't smile, not fully, but there was a weight in his nod that made her feel as if he'd agreed to something far larger than a name. They walked back toward the house, the drizzle fading into mist. Inside, the fire burned low, casting long, warm shadows across the floor. Clara set her damp shawl by the hearth, one hand resting over the swell of her belly. For the first time, she didn't feel like a stranger in these walls. And somewhere between the steady tick of the mantel clock and the soft sigh of wind against the windows, a fragile thread of hope began to weave itself through the quiet. Something neither of them dared name, but both could feel. The ground was stubborn that spring, as if winter still had its claws sunk deep into the earth. Each morning brought a thin crust of frost that melted into mud by noon, and the wind carried the scent of thawing pine from the ridge. Clara stood by the fence line with a basket of rose bulbs tucked in the crook of her arm, watching Elias work a spade into the dark, resistant soil. They had been at it for over an hour, moving in a slow rhythm. He broke the ground. She knelt to set the bulb. He covered it back over. The air was cool enough to make their breath visible, but the sun's pale warmth hinted at better days coming. "Never thought I'd be doing this again," Elias said after a while, leaning on the spade handle. "You mean planting?" Clara brushed dirt from her gloves. He nodded. "I told you before, it wasn't belief that kept me doing it. She thought the roses would bloom someday, even here. I knew they wouldn't. But when she looked out the window and saw me working the ground, she'd smile. That was enough reason to keep trying." Clara pressed another bulb into place, the papery skin soft beneath her fingers. "Maybe it was more than that," she said, glancing up at him. Elias frowned slightly, as if not following. "She was right to believe," Clara continued. "Belief isn't about knowing the soil will give you what you want. It's about planting anyway." She understood that. For a long moment, Elias didn't answer. The wind tugged at his shirt sleeves, the distant call of a meadowlark breaking the quiet. Finally, he gave a small nod, the kind that felt like it carried more weight than words. They worked in silence again, but it was a different kind of silence than when Clara had first arrived. Then, the quiet had been a wall, solid, unyielding. Now it felt like the space inside a seed, dark and enclosed, but ready to split open. By midday, they had planted the last bulb. Clara sat back on her heels, her knees aching from the hours of crouching. She looked down the crooked row of stakes and imagined the green shoots pushing up through the dirt, stubborn and slow, but alive. She realized her hands were stained with the same soil Elias had turned for years, soil he'd once believed could grow nothing worth keeping. And here she was, pressing life into it with her own palms. The thought settled in her like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward. She was no longer a guest here. Elias carried the empty basket back toward the porch, his boots leaving deep prints in the soft ground. Clara followed, pausing once to glance back at the row of freshly turned earth. She didn't know if the roses would bloom, but for the first time, it didn't matter. What mattered was that they had planted them together. That night, as the wind whispered around the eaves and the fire cast a warm glow across the room, Clara sat at the table mending one of Elias's work shirts. He was in the rocker, sharpening his pocket knife by the lamplight. Every so often he'd glance toward the window, where the moonlight traced a faint silver line along the newly planted row. When she finally set the needle aside, Elias spoke without looking up. "Those bulbs, even if they don't take, they'll stay in the ground for a while." Clara smiled faintly. "That's all right. I'm not in a hurry." And with that, the conversation drifted into a comfortable quiet. Outside, the earth held their work, waiting for its moment. Inside, something else had taken root, a shared act that bound them not by necessity but by choice. The day broke strangely still, the kind of stillness that made the hair on the back of the neck lift. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a bruised shade of purple, and thunder rolled low beyond the mountains. Elias stood on the porch, his gaze fixed on the ridgeline. A flash of lightning lit the horizon, followed seconds later by a sharp crack that seemed to split the air. Then came the smell, sharp, acrid, unmistakable. Smoke. Clara was setting the table when the first thin curl of haze drifted through the open window. The baby shifted restlessly inside her, as if sensing what was coming. Elias stepped through the doorway fast, his voice clipped. "There's a fire up by Briar Ridge. Wind's bringing it this way." Already he was moving, soaking blankets in the bucket, pulling a small pack from the closet. We can make it to the old stone hut on the North Trail. It's safe. Clara nodded, but as she reached for her coat, a sudden sharp pain lanced across her spine. She doubled over, grabbing the table for balance. Elias was at her side in a heartbeat. "Clara?" Her breath came quick, uneven. "It's time." Another contraction struck, harder this time, stealing what air she had left. Smoke thickened in the room, seeping through the cracks in the walls. Elias wrapped one wet blanket around her shoulders and another around himself, then lifted her as if she weighed nothing. "Hold on to me," he said, voice rough but steady. The air outside had turned to fire and ash. The wind screamed across the open field, carrying sparks that leapt like angry insects. The path to the North Trail twisted into a narrow ravine, half choked with dry brush. Elias moved fast, his boots striking hard against the ground, each step a fight against the gusts that threatened to throw them off balance. Clara buried her face against his chest, breathing in the damp wool of his coat to keep the smoke from burning her lungs. Another contraction hit, her body curling in on itself. "I can't," she gasped. "Yes, you can," Elias said, his voice low but fierce. "Just breathe, we're almost there." Behind them, trees cracked and burst into flame, the heat pressing against their backs. The ravine funneled the smoke until it poured over them in a choking wave. Elias kept going, his breath ragged now, but his grip on her unshakable. Finally, the hut emerged from the haze, a squat shape built into the hillside, its stone walls darkened with age. Elias kicked the door open, carrying her inside and setting her down on the straw-covered floor. The air was cooler here, the fire's roar muffled to a distant growl. He moved quickly, lighting a small oil lamp, fetching water from the barrel, spreading blankets on the ground. Clara cried out as another contraction rolled through her. He knelt beside her, taking her hand in both of his. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," he admitted, his eyes locking on hers. "But you're not alone." The next hours, or minutes, time no longer made sense, were a blur of pain and effort, the air thick with the scent of damp wool, smoke, and sweat. Elias stayed with her through every groan and cry, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement in a voice that trembled at the edges. She saw the ghosts in his eyes, the 7 small graves on the ridge, the years of trying and losing, but she also saw the fight there, the refusal to let this one slip away. And then, just when the weight of it seemed too much, a sharp new cry split the air, high, strong, alive. Clara's breath caught, her body trembling with exhaustion and wonder. Elias wrapped the small, red-skinned bundle in a clean cloth and placed her into Clara's waiting arms. "A girl," he said, his voice breaking on the word. Clara laughed and sobbed in the same breath. "Rose." Outside, the fire's fury began to wane, its roar replaced by the crackle of dying flames. Inside the hut, another kind of fire had been lit, a fragile, fierce spark that refused to be put out. The baby's cry rose again, echoing off the stone walls like a hymn, a sound that had not been heard here in years. Elias sat back on his heels, his shoulders shaking, not from fear but from something far more vulnerable. Relief. His eyes glistened as he reached out a calloused hand to brush the baby's cheek. "She's strong," Clara whispered. "So are you," he replied. The baby shifted in her arms, rooting for warmth, for milk, for life. And in that moment, the weight of fire and grief seemed lighter. Not gone, but no longer crushing. Clara leaned her head back against the wall, the newborn pressed to her heart, and listened to the sound that had already changed everything. The storm outside would pass, the smoke would lift, and the land would bear its scars. But here, in the old stone hut, they had claimed a victory, over flame, over loss, over the silence that had haunted them both. The kind of victory that would be remembered every time a rose bloomed in stubborn soil. When the smoke finally cleared, the valley wore its wounds openly, blackened fence posts, charred pine stumps, patches of earth where nothing but ash remained. The fire had spared the ranch, but only just. Elias rebuilt the south fence with the same steady patience he brought to everything, and Clara worked alongside him when Rose napped. her hands strong despite the tenderness in her body. The first neighbor arrived a week later. It was Tom Hensley, hat in hand, with a wagon full of lumber. He didn't linger in the doorway as he once might have. He stepped inside, set the boards down, and simply said, "Heard you could use these." Behind him came others, quiet, awkward at first, bringing sacks of flour, jars of preserves, quilts folded neat. Some left notes, scrawled in careful hand. "Sorry for what we said." Martha came last. She didn't look Elias in the eye, but she pressed a bundle into Clara's hands. 3 baby dresses, all in soft shades of cream and pale blue. "For her," Martha said, nodding toward the cradle where Rose slept. Her voice held no venom now, only something heavier, harder to name. Then she turned and left without another word. By the second month, the porch had become a place where folks would stop by on warm evenings. They brought pies, coffee, and stories from town. The old looks Clara had once endured, measuring, suspicious, were gone. She found herself answering questions, sharing recipes, laughing at small jokes. The baby passed from one set of careful arms to another, her dark curls catching the light, her name spoken without a trace of judgment. Elias never addressed the change directly. He didn't remind anyone of the things they'd whispered, nor did he accept their offerings with anything but a nod. But there was a quiet vindication in the way people sought him out now, asking after his advice on mending tools, planting schedules, or the weather up on the ridge. The same men who once turned their backs in the mercantile now tipped their hats first. One evening, as the sun sank low over the hills, Clara stood on the porch with Rose balanced on her hip. A few neighbors lingered by the fence, talking with Elias as he leaned against a post. She watched him listen, the light catching in his hair, his face calm and unguarded. "You've got friends now," she said when he joined her. "I've always had the land," he replied. "People come and go," she smiled, shifting Rose into his arms. "Looks like some of them are staying this time." He glanced down at the baby, who stared up at him with wide, unblinking eyes. "Maybe," he said, his voice softer now. It wasn't a parade or a grand declaration. There was no public reckoning, no formal apology spoken aloud. But Elias didn't need any of that. The truth was in the way the community came back. Not because he demanded it, but because they chose to. And for a man who had learned to live without expecting anything from the world, that was justice enough. A year passed, and the ranch was no longer the hollow, silent place it had once been. Spring had returned with a stubborn green that crept up the hillsides and softened the edges of the land. The south fence stood straight and strong, draped now with wild grass and the delicate sprawl of vines. On the porch, clay pots brimmed with roses. Not all of them had bloomed, but enough had opened their petals to spill pink and cream against the weathered wood. Their scent mingled with the warm air, drifting through the open windows and into every corner of the house. In the yard, Rose toddled barefoot through the grass, curls bouncing as she chased a slow-moving butterfly. One small fist clutched the stem of a newly picked bloom, its petals slightly crumpled from her grip. She laughed, a clear, ringing sound that carried all the way to the barn where Elias was mending a bridle. Clara stood at the porch rail, her hand resting on the curve of her belly, round once more with new life. She watched her daughter stumble, recover, and keep moving, each wobbly step determined. Elias joined her, the smell of leather and cedar still clinging to him. Without a word, he slid an arm around her back, his palm warm and steady. "She's fearless," Clara said, nodding toward the little girl. "She's yours," he answered, and when she glanced up at him, he added, "Ours." They stayed like that, side by side, watching Rose run through the yard. The late afternoon light bathed everything in gold, the sky stretching wide and open above them. Beyond the fence, the ridge rose dark against the horizon, the same ridge that held 7 small markers, and now, at its base, a patch of earth where roses had taken root at last. Clara thought of the day she'd first seen this place, how empty it had felt, how the silence had pressed on her chest. Now the air hummed with life, the low cluck of hens, the steady knock of Elias's hammer in the evenings, the chatter of neighbors who no longer turned away. Rose tripped, landing on her knees, but popped back up without a cry. She looked at the flower still in her hand, then at her parents, grinning wide before taking off again. The petals trailed behind her, caught in the light breeze, scattering like small blessings across the grass. Clara's voice was soft but certain. Some things must be lost to make room for miracles. Elias didn't reply, but the way his hand tightened gently on her back told her he understood. The sun slipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of amber and rose. And in that light, the ranch no longer looked like a place set apart from the world. It looked like the center of it. If stories like this stir your soul, subscribe to Dust and Destiny, share it with a friend, and tell us your thoughts in the comments.